Shenmue 3 has nearly arrived, and thanks to a demo released last week for backers of the game, we've finally been given the chance to experience that which was once thought impossible. Shenmue 3 does exist. And this small taste gives us a good idea of what we can expect from the final game. It's very much a continuation of Shenmue, but there are some positives and negatives to discuss. So today we're going to explore the demo in a preview fashion, observing its visual makeup and approach to design while taking an opportunity to compare against the Dreamcast versions. So join me as we take our first tour of Shenmue 3. The announcement of Shenmue 3 several years ago is one of those moments I really never expected, something which seemed like an impossibility that finally became reality. Shenmue would continue. Yet, there was also concern. You see, at time of release, Shenmue stood as one of the most expensive games ever, made by an industry-leading studio at the top of its game. In comparison, Shenmue 3 is a kick-started, lower-budget project made by a much smaller team. So how could they ever hope to compare? For starters, I feel the power of modern tools certainly plays a larger role here. The flexibility of Unreal Engine empowers developers to more efficiently build new experiences such as this in a way that wasn't really possible back in 1999. Many key features already exist within the engine itself and allows the team to experiment and utilize these features more rapidly than in the past. But it's the vision of what a new Shenmue game should be that I find most interesting here. You see, Shenmue 3 is a game that sticks very closely to the original design template, rather than attempting to mimic modern open-world design. Why does this matter? Well, Shenmue focuses more on smaller but densely packed areas, rather than presenting a massive, cumbersome open world, which could be much more expensive to develop. I feel this element is key to the design of Shenmue, however. The smaller scale and scope helps strengthen the bond between the player and the world as you spend more time within a specific area. You become more familiar with its locations, people, and choices available as you play in a way that doesn't usually work in a typical massive open world game. There's this intimacy between the player and the world that played a huge role in defining the original Shenmue games, and it seems the team has decided to continue this tradition, and I feel it's a smart decision both in terms of a game design perspective and a budgetary one. That doesn't mean there haven't been improvements to the formula, however. Technically speaking, with Dreamcast's limited memory, the original games needed to be broken up into smaller chunks divided by loading screens. Enter a shop, loading screen. Transition to the next area? Yep, loading screen. But it was expected and acceptable at the time. With Shenmue 3, however, it seems that this limitation has been mostly eliminated. While the demo only consists of one area, the map itself is reasonably large and detailed. Buildings can be entered and explored without cutting to a loading screen, and everything just feels rather seamless now. Even better, the small details you expect from Shenmue are present, at least in part. Walk into this store, for instance, and you can open just about any drawer or cabinet in the shop, while examining most of the objects littered about. There's no real gameplay benefit from doing this, of course, it's completely optional, but that's part of what makes Shenmue so special. It encourages you to slow down and appreciate the minutiae. Shenmue 3 also offers slightly more freedom in terms of exploration. It is still constrained, mind you, but it's now possible to walk out into the surrounding fields or behind buildings, slightly expanding that sense of freedom. The hub-like design of Shenmue persists here, but exploration now feels slightly more open-ended. The clock, of course, also plays a role with a proper time of day system, this time with actual shadow maps in addition to a schedule for various characters within the game world. If you stop and watch, these characters will go about their lives according to a pre-programmed schedule, it would seem. Now, we'll need to play the final game to judge the flexibility, of course, but at the very least, most characters within this small village do sort of follow this schedule. You'll see them move from, say, one activity to another and back again into other areas of the village. Then there's all the mini-games, of course, which are part of the Shenmue experience, silly as they may be. The demo includes things such as the option to train in battle or work on your horse stance.
Horse stance, huh? Maybe I'll give it a shot.
But there's other crazy things such as turtle racing. Or how about the log chopping minigame, which utilizes a rather AM2 style music track when you start nailing each chop.
That's it. Yes.
This is always one of the more unique elements of Shenmue, and it sort of ties back into AM2's arcade roots, where you have these small amusements scattered about throughout the world during your exploration. And there's quite a few of them in this demo, so I have to wonder just how many will exist in the final game. Then of course there's the conversation system. It works almost exactly as it did in earlier installments, so it feels instantly familiar if you've been playing Shenmue 1 or 2. It's just as simple as tapping the A button to engage conversation and then hitting a D-pad direction to select the next question. Of course, amusingly, the dialogue itself can feel just as awkward at times, which can be either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your preference. I personally love it.
Hey bud, over here. You can't play unless you buy some tokens.
Okay.
Buy some tokens if you want to play.
For such a small area then, it's surprising just how many things there are to do in this demo, and I will be curious to see how this is extended going into the full game. For now though, the core game design is very much directly following in the footsteps of the Dreamcast originals. Well, aside from the battle system perhaps, which lacks features such as throws and generally feels somewhat more button mashy if you will, it still works well enough, but I do feel it's a step back. It's a series that was born out of the idea of a Virtua Fighter RPG, so I had kind of hoped that they might push further in that direction, but instead the battle system feels somewhat simplified. Again though, this is just a demo, so we'll have to wait and see how things shake out in the final game. And that's kind of my current state of mind. I'm in a holding pattern, waiting to see how everything shapes up. I feel like the base game design here is very true to the Shenmue experience, and I'm impressed with how close it gets considering the lower budget. But how does it compare visually to the Dreamcast originals? Well, naturally, these games are 20 years apart from one another, so there is going to be a world of difference. But of course, the circumstances of the development also means a different approach. Character design has seemingly proven rather challenging for the team, with various changes appearing across various media released up to release. But in the end, I feel the facial modeling is generally quite good, with somewhat stylized designs that still resemble the Dreamcast original but feel somewhat updated for a more modern platform. That said, these stylized designs in some ways almost clash with the more realistic setting and lighting featured in the new game. I also feel that things like the animation used for the eyes and general facial expressions aren't as refined as they could be, but again, this is one of those things that becomes more difficult as your characters become more realistic. The Dreamcast version technically has these same problems as well, but because of the lower fidelity, it doesn't really stick out as much. That said, I'm rather happy with the jump in quality for the various denizens wandering around this environment. The original game had a very small polygon budget for these characters, and as a result they're almost universally blocky and slathered in low resolution textures. So Shenmue 3 feels like a genuine improvement in this regard. That said, Ryo's physique does still feel somewhat off in this new game. It's almost as if his coat has been inflated like a balloon, resulting in a slightly awkward gait. Though if you compare to the original Dreamcast era concept art, it doesn't seem that far off. Of course, we have come a long way since the original 2015 teaser.
Ryo, this way.
Okay.
I think it's a lot better. So character rendering as a whole is in a reasonably good place. It has improved since the earlier demos of Shenmue 3 for sure, but there are still some awkward moments. It is interesting to reflect back on what the original development team achieved for Shenmue 1. These original face demos were included on the Shenmue Passport disc. They basically describe certain functions of the game, such as how to control, how to train for fights, and so on and so forth. but the quality of the modeling itself is exceptional, and this wouldn't have been possible to fully realize in a real-time interactive game on Dreamcast, hence why it's limited to these smaller head demos. But I do feel that it sets a blueprint for where we could have gone with Shenmue 3. The model quality could certainly be improved with additional polygons, improved shading, and lighting, but I feel that this was the right path to take. In Shenmue 3, while it does head in this direction, it does feel just a little bit awkward in comparison, I feel. Still, I'm just nitpicking at this point. But I do really like the environment rendering. I think the team has done a great job here in this area. The environments themselves are lush and detailed, interiors are beautifully modeled, and the lighting is just superb, especially at dusk. I do have a soft spot for this specific region in terms of color choices used on the Dreamcast, but it is neat to see how the vision of this area has evolved for Shenmue 3. There's also a wealth of new rendering features available in Shenmue 3 that weren't possible before, such as foliage. The Dreamcast exists before a time when games featured significant foliage, and thus the developers had to rely on visual tricks to sort of build their scenes. And I think it's rather effective for the time, even if it appears a bit quaint by today's standards. So that's one of the main changes then. Shenmue 3 features complex tree models and lots of foliage that just wasn't possible on the original platform. But really, this type of environment only appears in the final act of Shenmue 2, which makes these comparisons rather difficult, as it doesn't really represent the look of Shenmue as a whole. So we've established that the game is shaping up rather well at this point, with huge strides made over the years since it was first revealed. While there are certainly some rough edges to be found if you look closely, I'm rather impressed with how much better the game looks now near release. But what about technical performance then? Well, this is interesting. Naturally, the demo we're playing here was released exclusively on the PC, thus we'll have to wait until release to test the PlayStation 4 version of the game. But on the PC side, I've been playing using a relatively high-end system equipped with the 2080 Ti and an Intel i9 processor, and as you would expect from such hardware, the performance is solid. 4K 60 is an absolute breeze, and it's even possible to play at higher frame rates such as 120 FPS with relative ease as well. That said, I did note some mild stuttering here and there when transitioning between the two areas of the world, something that could be exacerbated with slower storage or less memory, so that's something to consider. But of course, this is still a pre-release demo, and the PC I used isn't exactly representative of the common PC, thus when the final game is released, we'll be able to test across a wider range of hardware. I am certainly more curious though to see how Shenmue 3 will fare on PlayStation 4, as everything I've seen on the game has been on the PC thus far. I'd imagine that it will run at 30 frames per second like the original games, but it's not entirely clear if it will benefit from a resolution increase when played on PS4 Pro. One thing I do find strange, however, that likely applies to all versions is the field of view. Typically, a wider FOV is considered a positive thing, but in this case, I feel that the FOV is slightly too wide, distorting the viewpoint slightly in the process. I'd love to see an FOV adjustment option in the menu. Beyond that, however, the camera work in general feels somewhat off and unrefined at this point. Still, despite the critiques, I am overall happy with how the game is shaping up from a technical and presentation standpoint. Speaking of presentation, it's also worth noting that audio-wise things are shaping up rather well. The soundtrack is suitably Shenmue, with at least one of the original composers working on the project. And the audio compression for voices is also predictably of high quality versus the original games. It's really no surprise, honestly, and you would expect it from any modern game, but the originals were notable for the highly compressed voices. Either way, it's great to hear Corey Marshall again, that's for sure.
Hey, Shenhua.
Yeah?
I think we should split up and look for the bookie. I'll search from here to the village square.
So at this point in this rather rambly sort of video, I am actually feeling rather good about the state of Shenmue 3. There are some rough edges here and there for sure, but overall I feel the team has managed to capture the essence of Shenmue. It may not please all fans of the series, of course, but that's a near impossible goal, I'd say. The big question for me, though, is whether this style of game can appeal to a wider audience. As a fan of the series, I'm excited to see that they've continued the original design of the Dreamcast games. It feels like a natural evolution of the formula, but it also exhibits many of the quirks the series has become known for. So it will certainly be interesting to see how others respond without being invested in the series. But I think that's going to do it for now. I just wanted to share some impressions and thoughts on the current Shenmue 3 demo. As I've noted already, the game is very promising in this current state, but I'm eager to see more. The teaser trailer that plays at the end of the demo certainly suggests that there are many more different types of areas to visit within the game. But there's still a lot of questions that need answering. We'll just have to wait until the final game. But if you enjoyed this small preview video, as always, be sure to like and subscribe, follow us over on Twitter, and of course ring the notification bell for instant updates. And until next time, this is John, signing off.
A dragon shall emerge from the earth, and dark clouds shall obscure the heavens. A phoenix shall descend from above. Its wings will create a purple wind. In the midst of the pitch-black night, a morning star shall glisten, alone.